polyphenols and spices can neutralize these free radicals. So they have this antioxidant capacity. So that's one way in which they help us when we ingest them. And the second way is actually something that we call hormesis in biology, which is a little bit of stress is good for you. So the exercise is a great example. When you look at the effects of exercise on the human body in the short term, you actually see a lot of things go up in the short term that seem like they wouldn't be a good idea. Like blood pressure goes up, a little bit of inflammation goes up, and you think, well, that can't be good. But then what happens is once the stressor has been removed, you actually have greater cellular resilience. Now you have lower inflammation and lower blood pressure. So spice polyphenols...
This is like what my trainer tells me all the time. Like during the training session, it feels really painful and it hurts, but in the long run, it's good for me, which is what I always tell myself as I'm in the middle of the session wondering why I've done this to myself. And you're saying there's something sort of similar with
yes,
with
so
eating this food?
fasting is an example. In the short term, it can feel a little stressful and intense, but then long term, we know it can build some cellular resilience, help metabolic health, blood sugar control, that sort of thing. So spice polyphenols can be thought of as this short-term stressor, which is why they work as this defense compound against predators. And in our bodies, they also act in this way. They actually act as a little bit of a stressor, which then activates our own cellular antioxidant pathways. So a great example would be, and I don't want to get too technical, but there's a pathway that is sort of the master regulator of antioxidant status called the NRF2 pathway. And a lot of these polyphenols will activate our own cellular repair pathways because they are creating a little bit of stress through this mechanism of hormesis, just like exercise or fasting.
And I think the polyphenol research that's coming out now is fascinating. It's quite an exploding area of research, Jonathan, in the nutrition field. We know that people having high polyphenol diets, whether it's from herbs or spices or other foods. So, for example, polyphenols are found in very heavily pigmented kind of berries and vegetables. It's polyphenols that often give their colour to fruits and vegetables.
This is that like sort of eat the rainbow.
Yes, the dark green leafy veg, the berries, etc. Peppers, the yellow, the red, the peppers. And there's so much research, isn't there, Kanchan, coming out now showing that polyphenols are linked to all sorts of improvements in health, whether it be cancer, whether it be type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, any inflammatory related disease. And I think this is because there's evidence emerging around polyphenols beyond oxidative stress, around inflammation, about blood sugar control. I wonder if this is something that you've looked into or could talk a little bit more about, especially in terms of maybe some blood sugar control attributes of polyphenols.
So yeah, I think blood sugar control is a great one to look at because since the last time I was on the Zoe podcast, there has actually been a randomized control trial in humans, which unfortunately in the spice world are pretty rare. I guess there just aren't the right incentives to, spend all this money to show that like cinnamon or cumin can have a benefit because there's not so much patentability around these spices. But there was a study that came out very recently out of UCLA in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And it was a randomized control trial looking at the impact of cinnamon over 4 weeks in culinary amounts on blood sugar control using CGM. So there has been...
There's blood sugar sensors on there.
Exactly. So there have been quite a few studies looking at the impact of cinnamon on blood sugar, and there have been mixed results because people haven't always been able to use continuous glucose monitors. And, sometimes there's been an effect, sometimes there hasn't. So this group at UCLA really wanted to kind of use more cutting edge blood sugar monitoring technology. And they also wanted to look at exposure to culinary amounts of cinnamon. So they used...
That means like what I would use if I was just cooking at home. Is that what you mean?
Exactly.
As opposed to eating like, half a bowl full of it each day to try and get a big dose.
Precisely. So they looked at 4 grams of cinnamon a day. They had to put it in a capsule because it was a randomized double-blinded study. So they didn't want people to know they were having a sprinkling of cinnamon versus placebo. And what they found is that using the continuous glucose monitor, they observed statistically significant reductions in 24-hour glucose concentrations in the group that was exposed to 4 grams of cinnamon a day for 4 weeks versus the placebo. And so
that's amazing because that's not very much cinnamon, what you're describing, right? That's
So 4 grams is thought to be equivalent to about 2 teaspoons, which is not a sprinkling, but it's absolutely achievable. I mean, we can talk later about...
My daughter is delighted to have that in her oatmeal in the morning, I can tell you, without any trouble. So...
I'll have it in a pastry.
Yeah, well, there have been studies in the past looking at the addition of cinnamon to sort of sweet treats like rice pudding and the ability of just a teaspoon of cinnamon to sort of mitigate the blood sugar rise after something like that. I will say that in this particular study, which was randomized and pretty well done, they didn't observe a reduction in post-meal glucose concentrations after cinnamon. And they don't really know why. They think it may be the way the oral glucose tolerance tests are conducted and variability there. So anyway, I think overall the message is, if you want to work on more balanced blood sugar, obviously you do a lot of things for that. You should never think of a spice as a silver bullet solution to anything, but within the context of otherwise health promoting behaviors and a healthy dietary pattern, it can be a great idea to add more cinnamon.
Well, I think it's a beautiful demonstration, isn't it, that even a small amount of this particular plant with these very strong polyphenol properties can have some impact. And I think what you're saying is, obviously, you can't just go and eat pastry from Starbucks all day and put a bit of cinnamon on it and expect to have a fantastic health outcome. But I guess what you're saying, but if you think about that as almost like a proof of principle, I guess, and think about how you layer this on top, it's quite exciting.
Right. I think it's the way we think like, you can't out-supplement a poor diet in the same way you can't kind of hack your way with spices through a poor diet. But you can definitely enhance the quality of the diet by also adding spices. And I would argue also making food more exciting and delicious.
Yeah. And I think as well as blood sugar, another really important area related to spices is inflammation. And we now know that inflammation chronically, if it's in the wrong pace, the wrong time and excessive, can increase our risk of so many diseases. And it's actually inflammation that we think underpins the link between diet and many chronic diseases. I think this is a really exciting area of research related to polyphenols, but also to spices. And it would be great to hear your view on that.
Yeah, so a study that we talked about last time that I would love to mention again is the one out of Penn State that looked at the addition of a spice blend. It was many spices in the blend. And they added this to sort of a standard American diet, typical hamburger meal. So, something that isn't great for you. And they gave people the meal either with or without the spice blend. And they basically found reductions in inflammatory markers right after the meal when the meal had the spice blend. And I think that's really empowering and exciting because, again, it was culinary amounts of spices. I'm sure the burger tasted better with the blend versus without the blend. And there was this real reduction in biomarkers of inflammation right after the meal. So, that got people really excited because up until then, we only really had some in vitro and like animal studies on the inflammatory effects of spices. And now we had an actual human trial. And since then, there have been some more studies looking at the impacts of specific spices on inflammatory conditions like arthritis. So there was a study that got quite a bit of buzz looking at turmeric supplementation versus traditional sort of NSAIDs or non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs that many people use for arthritis but have some side effects, especially on gut health. And they found that turmeric supplements worked as well as the NSAIDs without the negative side effects. Now, the issue there is that they did use quite high concentrations of curcumin, which is the bioactive polyphenol in turmeric. So I think it's not clear that you can achieve the same therapeutic effect with turmeric in the diet if you have full-blown arthritis. But if you are looking to lower inflammation and, just prevent an inflammatory condition, I think that a case can be made for just adding more of these anti-inflammatory spices to your kind of regular rotation.
And so, Kanchan, when they've looked cross-sectionally at people, so at one point in time, those people that have a higher amount of particular spices, do they see that those populations have lower incidence of type 2 diabetes, lower incidence of heart arthritis, lower incidence of these chronic diseases that are underpinned by inflammation?
Right. So there's a couple of studies that have looked at either specific spices or spice blends. So there were studies that looked at the ingestion of chili peppers and actually all-cause mortality. So they weren't specifically looking at these these conditions, but they actually have found in a couple of these observational studies that regular chili pepper consumption does seem to reduce all-cause mortality, and
which is death, right?
Right,
Just
right.
you guys,
Death by any
you
cause.
scientists sometimes
Death
use
by
very
any
fancy
cause.
words, right?
And the thought is that chili peppers have these anti-inflammatory compounds like capsaicin that may impact chronic inflammation, systemic chronic inflammation. I mean, again, it's a bit of hand waving because we don't have like clear understanding around the mechanism. And I think in the last episode with you guys, Tim mentioned some data with the Zoe Predict study with chili peppers and changes in the gut microbiome that were more favorable towards an anti-inflammatory
Well, I wanted to ask
state.
about the microbiome for a minute because we've sort of not talked very much about it, but I know in other podcasts that we've done, often we've talked about the way that these bacteria inside our gut might be sort of the critical step between eating these compounds that maybe we as human beings can't even really break down, don't do anything, but these bacteria inside us have this capacity to break it down and then create these chemicals that then go into our body and have all of these benefits. Is that what's going on with spices?
I think that's definitely playing a role. And there was a study in Nutrients that looked at the prebiotic effects of the polyphenols in spices. So they looked at a blend of spices, again, encapsulated because it was a randomized control trial. And they found changes in the gut microbiota that seemed to be more favorable upon spice exposure versus not. I think it's an early area of research, and I'm sure there's going to be more coming out on what specific changes are occurring in the gut microbiome in response to which spices. But I think it's fair to say that while spices have direct anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects at a cellular level, they are definitely prebiotics for the gut microbiome, which are then also playing a role in their beneficial effects.
And I think this partly goes back to the whole area of polyphenols, that there's lots of species in our gut that convert polyphenols to their active form. So convert them to a form in which they have this kind of almost pharmacological-like properties in our body.
So what you're saying is there are these sort of species in our gut that are like taking in the spice can turn into something that suddenly turns this into pharmacology. You're saying like it sort of becomes a drug for us suddenly from something that is not a drug. You need the microbe to sort of translate. It's almost like it's unwrapping it, like
Totally. Love that analogy. So it's taking something that is quite inactive, i.e. it's all wrapped up, using your analogy, and it's unwrapping it and then creating a more active form that goes on to have these properties.
So it's like those pharmacy tabs you get sometimes were almost impossible to open the darn thing. Like, particularly when you're really sick, they're always like those things you can't break into because they think that somehow your small child is going to, so you're saying that my microbes are sort of like that, unwrapping this thing, getting it out. And therefore, presumably, depending upon the microbes you have, they may be more or less effective.
Yeah, and I think what Kanchan was referring to is the work from our Zoe Predict 1 study, where we looked in 1,000 individuals at the prevalence of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different gut microbiome species, and then we looked at people's diet. And what we found was quite a clear association between certain spices, certain herbs, and certain gut species.
Brilliant. Well, look, I would love to move from sort of generically why spices are exciting, and I think that is, once again, I'm really not eating enough spices, onto actually talking about spices in a practical way, thinking about what can we do, Kanchan. This time you have brought something fun to show us, is that right?
So I brought a spice box. So in India, where I grew up, pretty much every family has a spice box. We call it a dabba. It's just a big box with little tins inside. And every family has one, and it looks a little bit different depending on where you're from in India and what spices you prefer. There's some overlap. There's always turmeric. There's always chili pepper, and then a few differences. So I brought one today showcasing some whole spices like cinnamon, star anise, ginger, and a couple of others.
Amazing. And I remember that last time you said that growing up in India, sort of traditionally, this wasn't just about sort of making food taste better. Is that right?
Yes. So the spice box in India is really an integral part of our pharmacy, FARM, pharmacy, and it's rooted in the ancient Indian medical system of Ayurveda, which growing up, I sort of rolled my eyes at and thought it wasn't serious science. And then only when I became a PhD student and my lab began to study curcumin and turmeric for breast cancer was I reminder that maybe some of this ancient wisdom is actually proving to be correct.
I just want to be really clear here, right? So you are not saying, hey, any of these spices are a replacement for like modern drugs. You're saying, however, there are some real properties in them and we can learn something from that. And I guess that in a lot of modern drugs are sort of refined versions of compounds that are available sort of in the natural world, aren't they? I think about aspirin as a thing that I remember learning about, when I was a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. So shikimic acid, which is the starting point in the synthesis of Tamiflu, which is one of our most successful antiviral drugs, actually comes from star anise, which is in my spice box.